There is no such thing as the first person shooter genre. Okay, when you really think about it, there is fundamentally no difference between a first person shooter and a third person shooter, aside from the camera perspective. As a result of that, they are essentially the same thing, and we have to kind of lump in first and third person shooters with other kinds of shooters, including shmups, including rail shooters, right? It's all just one big genre that has a variety of subgenres within it, right? They are all fundamentally the same thing. When you take that into consideration, you begin to realize that slop like Doom is completely irrelevant and has done nothing to contribute to the wider gaming space. In fact, there are third person shooters that came out later that are objectively more influential than Doom. You know, games that are higher quality than it, games that just completely innovated on the shooter genre in ways that Doom could never even hope to, right? Of course, I've talked about games like Star Fox 64, like GoldenEye, like Turok. All of them are way better than any Doom game, but I think the most prevalent example of this phenomenon, the real influential shooter in gaming, you know, the thing that redefined the concept, that really introduced all these crazy ideas and mechanics is Resident Evil 4. You know, a third person shooter that innovated, that created iconic characters, memorable moments, innovated with its game design decision, you know, completely recontextualized the classic survival horror gameplay into more of an action focus, right? Resident Evil 4's influence can still be felt 20 years later. Meanwhile, Doom felt dated by like 1997, right? Like when you compare the long-lasting influence of Resident Evil 4 compared to the lackluster, lousy, just uninspired Doom, right? You know, something that didn't even really last a decade, right? You can see just how much more influential RE4 actually was. You know, when it comes to the enemy design, the AI, the things you can do to the enemies, the combat scenarios, the game's unique gameplay mechanics, right? You know, Resident Evil 4 innovated in ways that Doom never could. You know, all you do in Doom is run around a maze and shoot things. That's it. Like, there's no depth to it. There's no quality. Like, Doom mechanically is a complete mess. Okay? Like, Doom is not a very good video game. You know, when you compare it to RE4, which has, like, just all these iconic locations, amazing boss fights, fantastic, like, level design, you know, all these, like, crazy moments, right? Resident Evil 4 inspired an entire generation of aspiring game developers going forward, all of which tried to emulate it. You know, games like Dead Space, games like Gears of War, like all of them essentially were trying to be RE4. Now, they couldn't do it quite as well because Resident Evil 4 was a Nintendo GameCube game and, you know, was just so much more cutting edge than everything else that came out around the same time. But, like, there is no denying it that Resident Evil 4 has left a bigger impact on the gaming world than Doom ever has or ever will. That's the reality of the situation, is that Resident Evil 4 is just so much more influential, iconic, and memorable than Doom ever was. But the narrative has always been that Doom is this big deal, to the point where, like, a lot of people, when Animal Crossing was coming out, you know, a lot of people honestly believed that Doom Eternal would easily outstrip, like, Animal Crossing New Horizons in sales. You know, this was before people realized just how big of a deal Animal Crossing actually was. But the idea that Doom is this, like, super popular thing is nothing but an illusion. It's nothing but a farce, right? Like, it's just a giant cope to distract you from the fact that the real innovators have always been exclusively on Nintendo hardware. You know, this is where developers can utilize the most cutting edge technology in gaming. This is the hardware where developers reach the most hardcore gamer demographic. These are this is the hardware where everyone understands what a video game is, right? Something like Doom, as I've mentioned before, is entirely defined by like the controversy surrounding it. This narrative that it's too violent or it's satanic. There's a reason why we talk about that instead of the game itself. Like how many Pokemon fans do you see like talk about, Pokemon being accused of satanic, right? Like it's not really a thing. Because Pokemon fans are too busy talking about the actual game. And meanwhile, you don't hear people say that kind of thing about RE4 at all because the actual game exceeds any public reception or reputation the game might have. Right. This is why Resident Evil 4 is better than Doom because Resident Evil 4 doesn't need to sit there and act as if like the game is more controversial and edgy than it really is. Right. It doesn't have to pretend. Essentially, Resident Evil 4 became popular and iconic on Nintendo GameCube because of just how phenomenal of a game it actually was. It didn't need to rely on gimmicks. It didn't need to rely on like game journal propaganda, right? It was just a really, really solid game developed exclusively for Nintendo hardware. And this is why the game far exceeds anything that's ever been put out on PC, right? There is no denying that Resident Evil 4, in a lot of ways, is the last truly great AAA game ever produced because it understood what needed to be done to innovate on the genre. It understood what hardware it needed to be on, and it really pushed boundaries when it came to game design and innovation, with creating a really unique game that people still play and enjoy to this day, even now that they've put out in a vastly inferior remake. That goes to show you just how influential and popular Resident Evil 4 actually was. Something like Doom has never even come close. And now that I've played Doom, all I can tell you is that I would much rather go back and play through Resident Evil 4 again than ever go back and play any one of these sloppy, uninspired first person shooters.